There we go, everybody. Good to see everybody here. Today, we've got Aphrodite Salas, a friend of the club. And just a few quick notes about what she's been doing. She is a visual journalist who's worked across Canada and around the world. Now an assistant professor in the Department of Journalism and the director of the Graduate Diploma Program at Concordia. She holds an honors BA from the University of Toronto and an MA in public policy and public administration from Concordia. I didn't put the year in there.
That's okay.
Aphrodite has been a video journalist and an assignment editor at CTV Montreal. She was the senior anchor at Global Quebec and hosted her own current affairs radio program on 940 Montreal. As a national correspondent, she covered Parliament Hill in Ottawa for CityTV. She was also a national correspondent for CTV News in Montreal and was the network's transportation reporter in Toronto. As an anchor, Aphrodite has been on the desks of CTV Newschannel, CityTV, CP24, and she's been in Kitchener and Saskatoon. So I tell you, this is big time. She started her visual journalism career producing short documentaries at the Reuters East Africa Bureau in Nairobi, Kenya. I remember you talking about this a couple of years ago.
Right.
She's also worked in India, England, the United States, and she has sailed around the Pacific Ocean. That's one I didn't know about. That might be worth a talk in itself one day. Her industry honors include 4 RTDNA awards. And if you'd like to know what that is the Radio Television News Directors Association of Canada. Those awards all for excellence in news reporting. Today, we're going to catch up with what she's been doing. Aphrodite traveled to Inuit with her students in November of 2021 on a collaborative project exploring the first hydroelectric dam in Arctic Quebec. And with that, madam, I'll give the floor to you. You've got about 20 minutes and we'll have time for questions afterwards. So again, thanks for coming and the floor is yours.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for that introduction, Jim. And I'm so pleased to be here amongst you. I remember a few years ago, you invited me to Victoria Hall, where we had a lovely lunch, and I spoke about one of the first projects that I did in this umbrella of what I'm working on now. So the first project, I think, if you recall, was highlighting climate leadership in Gull Bay First Nation in Northern Ontario. And that was a wonderful project with incredible people. Since then, as Jim mentioned, in November 2021, I headed up north here in Quebec. I'll explain a little bit more, but just for context, since 2018, so that's when I left CTV Montreal full-time and moved to Concordia University in the journalism department. So since 2018, I've been working with an amazing group called Indigenous Clean Energy. And that group is a collective really of Indigenous groups from across the country that are all working on clean energy solutions in their own communities. And so I've been working with this group to develop strong relationships with communities that are leading the shift to clean energy, which is very exciting. So we work collaboratively to develop journalism that will really amplify these stories of Indigenous climate leadership. So I have CTV as a media partner, CTV Montreal. I also work with Journalists for Human Rights as another partner. They provide training in Indigenous reporters in reporting for my students. And of course, Indigenous Clean Energy is the communities, that's how I develop through the ICE. They're called ICE Group. I develop different relationships with communities across the country. So underlying this, you might be asking, why is she doing this now? And the truth is, before I left CTV in 2015, I'm sure you all know about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that happened in Canada, looking at just the past and trying to provide a roadmap to the future. And within the final report for the TRC Commission, there was a series of calls to action. And one of those calls to action was for journalism educators, basically saying that, recognizing that for generations, journalists caused great harm to Indigenous peoples by using racist, negative stereotypes in their reporting, and by literally, parachuting in and out of their communities, not developing relationships, and practicing something that's called extractive journalism. That is something, that is considered as unpleasant as it sounds, really. So that's the why. And I sat back and I thought, what can I do? And as a journalism educator, with all of these collaborations, I thought, how amazing would it be to find very strong and positive stories of change in climate action through my partners at Indigenous Clean Energy, and involve students who are, very strong in their skills, about to graduate, and work together to create journalism that we can then put on CTV to amplify, these positive messages, right? So the idea is to identify these great, strong stories of leadership. The methodology is to do journalism in a different way, to take our time, to build relationships of trust, to build relationships where we're working together over long periods of time, and not kind of going in and out and leaving and just, having the voices not representative in a way that, is accepted or even supported by the community. So that's kind of that is the area that I'm working in. And the exciting thing is that I've sort of developed a bit of a roadmap on how to do this kind of journalism, informed by research in Finland on conciliatory journalism, which follows a lot of these principles, and collaborative journalism. So I really genuinely believe now, after almost 5 years of doing this, that I feel like we're onto something, because the students come away with a much greater appreciation on how to do journalism differently. The two communities that I've been working very closely with over the past several years, have become very strong and positive partners with myself, with CTV Montreal, the journalism department. And I feel like it allows us to look to the future in a different way, right? With hope for renewed relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples, as well as hope for, stronger climate action, and looking to these communities to learn from their own leadership. So that's kind of the context of what I'm doing. So you can imagine that in the middle of the pandemic, the idea of, 2019 was when I first started speaking to the climate leaders in Inukjuak. Inukjuak is 5 hours north of Montreal, flying due north on the coast of Hudson Bay. So it's quite remote. It's in Nunavik, which is the Arctic region of Quebec. It's quite remote. And traveling there in the middle of the pandemic obviously was extremely complicated, just because we had to wait for a pocket of time where we would actually be able to travel, that it would be safe to travel, that we wouldn't be, at risk of bringing anything or, any to the community, because it's so remote. So we ended up going in November of 2021. So it took 2 years to develop that reporting trip. The students, as I mentioned, received training in Indigenous reporting before that. Willow Fiddler, who's an amazing Indigenous journalist at the Globe and Mail, gave trainings. Readings were included in as well for the students from the final report of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And before leaving, I asked the students to really reflect on their own perspectives regarding what they knew, what they thought they knew, what they realized they didn't know. And this was a really interesting process. I had 3 students that came with me to Inukjuak. And some people say, why did you only bring 3? Well, I wish I could have brought more, but it was quite limited because Inukjuak is a small town, about 1,800 people. And there are no car rental agencies. There are no restaurants. There's a co-op where you can rent a room to sleep, but it's not, it would have been difficult to bring a group larger than 3. So my community contact that I had been working with for 2 years before ended up helping me find a community member to hire as a driver with a truck that it would be the driver, myself, the 3 students in the back, and we would, collaboratively work for the time that we were there and stay in the co-op. So it was really great though, because we did a lot of legwork before we went. I continued Eric Tegutalik, who is featured in this short documentary, gave the students pre-travel training, just background on this community of different things. Sorry, the light in my office goes off automatically if I don't move around. So as long as you can still see me, can you still see me? Yes, okay. So Eric gave some excellent training before leaving, just on Inukjuak. I don't know if everybody knows the history of this area, but 2 big things happened that really affected Inukjuak and all of Nunavik and the Inuit as well. The killing of the sled dogs. So the sled dogs that they typically used for, basically considered as members of their family, used for hunting and travel, were killed in droves in the 50s, and actually it was RCMP and Quebec police as well. And so that was very detrimental to the community, as well as a forced relocation of a small number of people from Inukjuak all the way to Resolute Bay, which is far north, by the Canadian government to occupy this space for security. This is what was said at the time. But these things affected the community greatly. And so we needed to know the context. The students needed to know the context of the place that they were going. And Eric, our partner, was so gracious in meeting with us, speaking with the students, and really giving them a perspective that I think is lacking in our public school system, something that needs to change. But that's another topic. So just to make the point that we built these relationships over time, we didn't just go in and out. The relationships continue to this day. And we spent almost a week there shooting on 3 iPhones. So we shot a short documentary of 13 minutes on this amazing hydroelectric facility that they're building, photo gallery, and a multimedia site, which I'll show you in a few minutes. But the story focuses on this amazing story of this community that's building the first hydroelectric facility in the Arctic. The reason why it's special, it's a run-of-river facility, which means it doesn't dam up the water like other problematic projects have in the past. It diverts water from a river that then turns turbines. So the water then makes clean energy by being diverted and then turning these turbines. So this community functions, all their power needs up until now have been through diesel. And diesel energy, as you know, diesel fuel can be dangerous. There can be spills. There's lots of problems associated with it. We talk about this in the documentary. But they decided they wanted to go with clean energy, and they spent almost 20 years really researching this and going through different options. And we came up with, of course, the multimedia story, but the short documentary that really says how amazing this is. And it's thought to be the first community to go 100% off diesel, which is huge. So a lot of these clean energy initiatives, solar or wind, might replace 20% of diesel use, 30% of diesel use, 40% of diesel use. But a community that's replacing 100% of diesel fuel use with a renewable energy project is almost unprecedented. So it's very impressive. And I have to tell you that the past 2019, 20, 21, 22, 3.5 years that I've been working with Eric and his partners, I've been consistently impressed with their vision, with their hard work, and with their will to make things better and set an example for the rest of the country to follow. So on that note, the documentary made its 12.5 minutes. I think I've got time to show that 12.5 minutes. So I'm going to show you the documentary. Right before I play it, I just want to show you the CTV site. So can you all see the CTV site? Yeah. So basically, this is the site, and I can send you the link. This is the documentary if you're at home and want to watch it on your own, but I'll show it to you in a bit. This is Eric, I mentioned, Tegatalik, our partner, amazing, visionary. This is a full article. This is a beautiful photo gallery. This is a separate documentary that features the voice of Simeone Nalukturuk, who is an elder who passed away in production, who speaks about all of those things, the sled dogs, the relocation, the residential schools. And we wanted to pay tribute to him and really, in his own words, honor what he was saying. So we made a separate documentary here that is critical to watch, I think, as well. And then here you have more information about this place that's in Quebec, but so almost as far as London, England, in fact, about diesel fuel, a bit about the local history. And right here, this is about the project that explains what I mentioned earlier about the whole point of what I'm doing now, which is to hopefully make a difference in how reporters, non-Indigenous reporters, are reporting in Indigenous communities. So that's the website. And now I'll play the film. So I hope you like it. And I'll answer questions afterwards. So if everybody can see. Okay.
Akaronita sa lakitani tamani klub. Kama yutsu tatamak kuninga nunani, tamak kuninga imang. Avati italima tilo ani tuina, asi itong haksimaw. Salumay tuit uksualo tututik malioti tikumatit siwut tikumani. Ukuyo tsisutilu iluyo atini. Isiani uksualo salumay litiriyo panang nisang sirmimi imang milo. Taman na nukahulak tav. Taman na lo asi ito lang alaksu.
So here we have our 500-gallon tank, which heats our homes. Sometimes we run out of fuel. We don't have any heat in our homes sometimes for a day or two. Even if there's a small spill, you can smell it in the whole, in the whole house. So even inside in the house, sometimes there's fuel spills and there's leaks. Sometimes the tanks are so old that they start to rust, and they start to have leaks around these places, around the bottom ends here, and that's where it starts to leak, and that's where it's very dangerous. All of our communities right now, we're all dependent on diesel. We use about 3 million liters of diesel every year. The recreation center, the hospital here, the local clinic, it's a constant risk.
ukso aluttunik miliagasaktuanik anyo kaisugubuk puyuklunik akkautamaat kubuyuhauni patlu nuna imalu sukkataw marigunna sutik nunay lima nakitsahutingit sukkataw tilugit ima nuna vimmi sikuyangmat kisiani ukso aluttaw ti tumiakjuat ukso alumik takkaliaw tigunna sisuut akituyualo salumay tusunilo at tanakon na sunilo.
That to me is a constant risk when we're looking at fuel delivery. There's been thousands of liters spilled in the past few years.
2015 mi 13,000 kaluti tungatanot kuyo kalawyo kukswalam mi tamani inutruami. Silni mo kalawyo sukunakto tatsisuni nunami ang iyo alam mi. Wakayak daw lakit suni halunano lo awlat itaw yakalakit suni iiyak to su. Tay kanit senap akagumi 14,000 kaluti tungatanot kukswalam mi kuyo kalawyo miyok iwuyivimi. 3,000 years late, halutit kuvimitillugit saloni.
This is the pipe where the ship connects on the shore. And this pipe leads to the tank farm, where all the fuel and gas is delivered. If those tanks are out of diesel before the end of the year, we have no other resource to get additional diesel. It's the only way to ship it to our community is by ship. So between July and October, that's when the ships start coming in. And if they don't make it by that time, we're stuck with no diesel. It was never delivered. With a small community like ours, how do we find ways to no longer depend on diesel? It's a huge challenge. We kind of thought about that. What are our options? Why not renewable energy? Inuit is fortunate enough to have a river where it has continuous flow, and that will allow us to reduce the amount of diesel that we use for our community.
Isumatakayaw yumut piyak piliutihapsimayo.
The natural flow was to the left.
125 million talakak tumik akihalangatilugu pinaswahatihautaw sitsuni. Sivulipat semik ikumautiliutaw sitsuni kumi simituinikut kubay tapkangani. Tamatumaw pinasutaw ninga at sakaktaw utilik innavim. Inutitut innavik upilik ipiarawa pitsuni urakaktalik kisautimik tingaw janilits.
Very impressive. You don't, until you get to see it in real life, the impact, the visual impact is very impressive.
It's the first project that's getting built so far in the north. And be the first one building a structure like that in the north, yes, I'm very happy. Challenge is the location of this project. There is no road access. So to have all your equipment and material to do the construction, you need to bring it with barge boats. So it is a very complicated logistic season for construction. Is very, very small. So you have to fight with the nature.
Nunakatita ilangin no taman na nunaw piusak susinganik asit ituinik isumalagot iyo katatok. Amisunak sa suta tamatuminga pinaswakto yumik angit si magalwak tiluta. Kinguvari tigut tamatuminga nunamik ungumatsi si mayugut. Asit ituktaw lang malo isumalon ng kayang ito.
With hydropower, we're manipulating the river. We're putting stuff in the river that hasn't been there before, and that's what some of the community members are struggling to accept. Will the fish get sick? Will the water be drinkable? Is it safe? Will the community be flooded? I mean, my ancestors been here for a very long time, and they've relied on the water for food and sustenance, so it's really important.
Pinaswaktaw lang ayok piyalaw tinagu awi sa katalaw yugut nunamik imang milo akago ni talimaw yok takasani. Sukwa tirigo mangimut. Ikaluit kukut mayukat halutik situkat ako ng inalaktut. Suvayak viun na tuilo inutat ni ruto ng samik ni kinaswak viun na niaksutik anaw maviun na nagsawlutilo.
The community requested that we test the water every day, just to make sure that the quality is not being impacted by all the construction activity. Water quality looks normal according to the measurements so far. It's a very good indication.
Itaksimat siya tu taman na imaktavi at si mga tigo inuutit samik apkawa saktuani amisuni. Tagatagalinotanik pivit sa tapi yung nasa kunaktok uwat tino. Simito tayo nga piyakirpat sa lumayumik ikumaliw tahaw nalalak tugot inutwami. Iyo puti hat talugulog hingumay ngitawot ikumotik kupaikot ikumaniatik kong inyo. Ino ya itmiyalak kita at migun na sila ang mata pinasukat sa niktigot-tigot inilo nuitirigot tawlutik inukutik tinualing alangayon.
In our community, we have the highest rate of unemployment. And I think we're the second highest population in Nunavik. So with that, we can start making jobs that are for our people.
It will help us come up with programs to support our community priorities, not in just economic development, for social growth and for skills enhancements.
For me, I'm very proud of this project. We'll be selling our electricity to Hydro Quebec, and all the profits will go back to the community.
That's very important, to have Inuit-led management, Inuit-led projects, because, if it was Hydro-Quebec, I'm not sure that they would be sensitive to, the community issues.
I think the world is ready for that change. Like 10, 15 years ago, nobody was ready for it. So I think our timing is kind of perfect for the world to follow our change. One of the big things I always dream about is a healing center. I think that would be a good way to bring back many of our traditions that we had lost.
I think it's very important for an Inuit-led project like this to start from the bottom up, to have the community lead the project. We have plans to develop programs, develop, our community to become trainers, teachers, carpenters, electricians, mechanics.
I see my people standing on their own 2 feet and working on their identity, on their culture and themselves.
All right, so that was the doc. Oops, it's still playing. Hang on one second.
Let's head for Beatrice Deer and the Beatrice Deer Band.
Right, that's Beatrice. Oh, hang on one second. I've got it. There we go. Yes, Beatrice Deer. We managed to get Beatrice Deer for the music. I actually reached out to her producer and asked to buy the rights to use 2 of her songs, and they were, wonderful to work with. And we chose songs that we thought really resonated with the story. But I would just like to say, we screened the documentary at the UN Biodiversity Conference here in Montreal in December, COP15, as part of the official programming of the Canada Pavilion. And Indigenous Clean Energy also screened it at Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, at the UN Climate Conference in November. So we had a launch first in the community at the high school that we did via Zoom, and it worked out great. The next day we went live on CTV, and then to Egypt and at COP15. So that was so that's the documentary, and I invite you to see yes, I can see that Wilmer put the link in the chat for everybody to see and explore the rest of the multimedia project. But I hope you enjoyed that as much as we enjoyed making it. And I'd love to take any questions at this time.
I'll start the questions off then, Aphrodite. It's like a really feel-good story. It sounds like it's something where both the government and the local community were able to work together. It sounds like environmentally that it's, despite seeing that big sluice that they had to create, that's moving a lot of rock. But it seems like a good feel story. What have been the negatives?
The negatives of the story or the process, or
of the development.
Of the actual hydroelectric facility?
Yeah.
So the community voted for it in referendum, and I have the referendum, if I'm not wrong, I think it was 83% for. And as in the documentary you saw, we interviewed a community member who was worried about the fish. So this is something that there was a concern in the community. Now, I'm not an expert, so I do want to say that, but from Tommy Palliser, who's also in the documentary, made it very clear that, this project was 15 years in the making, and the discussion started almost 20 years ago. And so they've worked very hard to do things like that water testing every day, to make every single day Eric goes and tests the water. It's quite something. The spawning beds were made larger to make sure that the fish would not be affected and have space to spawn. So there's been, and really, I think the community, I'm not the one to judge a project, but I can tell you, in discussing with the community and really being there in discussions, speaking with them for this amount of time, I think that many of them seem very, very happy about this climate leadership.
Excellent. Anybody who has questions, you can put up your hand and we'll call you out. Now, are they selling power to Hydro-Quebec?
Not yet. So the official opening is because they're still working on the facility. So we were there in 2021 November. So it was slated to finish this spring. In the end, I think it'll be finished by the summer. So the idea is it'll be operational at some point this year, in the second half of the year. And then that's when they'll be making the power and being able to move 100% to renewable energy and replace the diesel, because the diesel is really, as you saw, I didn't know that when I first started speaking with this community. I had no idea that they could only be powered, like the fuel has to be sent up by ship. And like you saw, the way it has to go all the way around Newfoundland and Labrador and go all the way around. And it can only do that when the water is thawed. So that can only happen a few times a year. So as Eric said in the documentary, if things don't get moved up there, by ship when the water is thawed, and when the ships are able to make it, they just don't have access to materials or fuel. So it's really an untenable situation. Like from what the community told me, I mean, the fact is they just didn't want to be reliant on diesel, that, you know, they had all these spills and that, you know, it's inconsistent and had to be shipped up there. I mean, they had to find another way. That was their perspective. They just didn't see a future of consistently depending on diesel fuel that was shipped up from south at great expense, cost, and potential danger.
We have a hand up here. That would be Sam Watts. Sam, would you like to step in, and then we'll do Peter Starr afterwards?
Well, of course, I'd like to step in because Aphrodite is a friend of mine. So,
So nice to see you, Sam.
I've seen the documentary before, so it wasn't my first rodeo, but great job. And I'm wondering if there are other journalism projects that you contemplate in perhaps other areas, and if other parts of Nunavik are contemplating the same sort of move. The geography, of course, is very different up there, place to place to place.
Right.
But I wonder immediately what Kuujjuaq is thinking if they're looking at this project. So don't know if you had any of those discussions, but I thought I'd throw all that stuff out there.
Right. Well, thank you, Sam. It's wonderful to see you. Yes. And of course, I really do appreciate your question. So first of all, likely we'll be going back up for the opening to document the opening. So that's one other thing. There's been a lot of talk about this project, not only at COP27, but also there's a conference in Ottawa in February called the Northern Lights Conference, highlighting Arctic action. And I know that Eric will be down speaking about the project. There's been great interest. The thing with hydroelectric projects like this, as you know, is that it has to be feasible in the community. In terms of other projects that I'm working on, I'm also working with an amazing environmentalist in Northern Saskatchewan named Jordan Burnoff through Indigenous Clean Energy. And we're working on highlighting a few different things happening in Saskatchewan. I'm also working with Daryl Brown, as well as Indigenous Clean Energy, and potentially highlighting some amazing climate action of another community in Northern Manitoba that's in the process of beginning to build a big solar wind farm. So it's exciting, I have to say, in terms of other projects. Like I've got several projects lined up for similar multimedia treatment or collective journalism, I would say, for the next several years. So there's no shortage, which makes me very happy.
Peter Starr, would you like to step up?
Oh, sure. Aphrodite, that was a great presentation and a really important subject. And we thank you very much for sharing it with us today.
Thank you.
I just want to go back in history, and I've had my reception here is on and off, so I might have missed something. But when you were talking about killing the sled dogs, and that the RCMP and government were responsible for doing this and executed it, what was the logical reason why they decided they'd have to kill the sled dogs? They didn't want these people to be mobile?
Well, there was a commission, actually. So there was a commission into all of this. And so, you know what, I don't want to say anything wrong, but there's a whole commission if you look at overcoming the past. So that is the whole section that talks about the sled dogs. So the sled dogs also Kimmit, Q-I-M-M-I-T. So there were apologies issued for the killing of the sled dogs. And I think if you ask why, as you just said, you know, the idea that I think a lot of people think is to keep people in one spot. At the time and in these commissions, a lot of the reasoning was because the dogs were sick or they were concerned about illness. But I would really, so there's a lot of documentation on this, and it's very fascinating. And I really strongly believe that this should be included in the education curriculum of our high schools, because it's something that I only learned about in the process. But really, it's in that CTV link. If you look at Overcoming the Past, you'll see the words of Simeone Nalukturuk, who talks about what happened in his community and his own memories of that time.
Yeah, I think what happened there was typical of what the governments and what the white people were doing. And it was just another part of the genocide.
Mm.
Really, really think so.
Shameful.
Yeah, interestingly enough, and typical of the times, but in 1922, they filmed Nanook of the North.
In Inukjuak.
Exactly, and talk about a stereotypical thing that the white people would do and bring down. And kids in my age, or when I was a kid, we all knew about Nanook of the North. That was how you describe the people.
It's interesting that you should mention that film, because in our first meetings with Eric actually said you should all watch this film before coming. About the sled dogs as well. So Kimmit, as I said, there's a really great documentary that was made that you can find on the NFB that talks about it. So again, Peter, you bring this up, the question, was it done deliberately by the government to force them off their land, keep them in one place? Some do believe that, but the Kikitani Truth Commission looked into it, reported there was no conspiracy, but there's different viewpoints, right? So that are covered in that film, not only by the Inuit, but also by the RCMP. But like I said, it's really fascinating. Simeone Nalukturuk's in his own words on the website, and we worked with his widow to make sure that she accepted and the family accepted and was supportive of us putting this together and putting it on CTV. So again, that was a collaborative effort. I visited her personally when she was in Montreal and showed her a cut before, like the final cut before it was public, asked permission. And she did tell me that she was happy that we were able to kind of capture these perspectives of her husband, who was really a very respected community leader and was mayor at the time when we were visiting. So he tragically died about 6 months later. So we were there in November 2021, and he died in April, I believe, just in 2022. So it's really an important context. Initially, we were going to put everything together in the same documentary. The reason why ultimately I decided to separate is just because I thought it would be a better tribute to Simeone to have, and it's the same length actually as the climate documentary, and it's really in its own words.
And I think you said that this project took 30 years from initial conception to cutting the ribbon.
About 20, I would say, from when they first started thinking of clean energy alternatives to assessing. Eric told us that initially they thought that wind or solar might be a better option, like in terms of half and half, but they had just their positioning where they are on Hudson Bay. In the end, wind wasn't going to be the greatest option. And also solar, as you know, well, now we have these lithium batteries that store solar energy to allow for later usage. But at the time when they were looking into it, that it wasn't an option. So that's how they kind of came and then really researching it over this 15 years.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
With everything being shipped up there, like what's the cost of a liter of milk or oranges or eggs?
Right. That's a great question. So David, everything is extremely expensive. So when we went up, Eric told us if we wanted to bring some of our own food, there's just 2 stores. So a bigger store where you can buy things and, but when they run out, they run out. So, and that it's a big problem, right? It's a big problem. And so that's also, interestingly, I spoke to Sarah Lisa, and she said that they're also going to be starting community gardening and trying to do that with all of this extra energy, to have like some community gardening facilities where they'll be able to, grow a lot of fresh produce as well. Because the climate is difficult. I mean, if I look at my weather today, right now, I'm going to look at my weather for Inukjuak because I have it on my phone. It's minus 27 right now.
Yeah.
At this moment in Inukjuak, it's minus 27, and the overnight low tonight is minus 33. And it's windy, right? So, and all week, every single night, the low, Friday, minus 39 low, minus 32 high. So the conditions, right, are, you know, there's a lot to consider.
Thank you.
They say that the cost of food up north is a minimum 90 to 100% higher than in the south.
I took a picture. I'm going to look it up because I took a picture on the last day we were there. We were leaving to the airport and we didn't have any food and we ran to get some food. And I remember I bought 4 pieces of pizza and I just want to remember how much we paid, but I took a picture because I was like, oh my God, this is so expensive. What did I do? I just want to, because I know I have these pictures. Okay, I'll have to look it up. Sorry, maybe another question in the meantime.
Well, yeah, well, we have George would like to ask a question.
Go ahead, George. You'll have
I've been anxiously looking forward to this discussion because as a young man, I worked on a hydro project way up north, Lac Saint-Jean, but not as far north as this one is. And of course, they were counting on a reservoir that they built, which I understand they're not concerned with that at this one. But when I look at what you showed us in your film, that was really the beginning because, oh my God, there's so much more has to be done once they get that built. And I was fortunate later on in life to work for a company called Dominion Engineering. And I was put in a turbine division. So wow. I was doing some changes for divisions for other countries, Australia, etc. And so I know how that all functions, but like I'm not prepared to go and work up there. Although at one point, as a young man, an engineer wanted to hire me.
Wow.
I didn't see that as a lifestyle for my wife and I, who were expecting our first child at the time, to be working out of construction.
Right.
But it was very interesting for me to see this and watch it. I was hoping there would be even more to show the runoffs and whatever.
Then you'll have to check out the website, and also we'll have more when we go up for the official opening.
Yeah, well, of course, I always went up in April and worked through, because I was getting out of school early, not having to do the summer exams. And I would work till late August to come back in time to go back to school. And
wow.
After that, I worked at Dominion Engineering for 3 years. So it was interesting I was looking forward to seeing this.
What an experience you must. So then you can particularly appreciate what was involved to bring all the construction materials up there.
Well, I must tell you that my future father-in-law was the one that lined up the job for me when I went up there at 15 years old.
Wow.
And he took me in a little panel truck that he had. He said, let me show you the tunnel that they're working on. And the tunnel, if you could see my fingers, looked to me about this size going down in the truck. But as we got there, this became this size, and the noise coming out of there, because they were drilling on the walls with 20 or 30 drills on what they call the jumbo. They would drill these, and all of them going at once. Actually, I thought I was going to lose my job because after I was there 2 weeks, I went deaf because the wax in my ear was so thick I couldn't hear. I couldn't hear the guy that was giving me instructions on a piece of equipment that I was supplying him with cement, etc.
Oh my.
But they cleaned it out and the guy said, well, you might have to come back and see me every 2 weeks, but that didn't happen.
Oh my
Okay.
goodness.
That once.
Wow.
It was
Wow.
interesting to see it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Listen, Aphrodite, thank you ever so much for joining
Yes.
us. And as Charles Pierce noted in the chat, a real eye opener. And as George said, boy, there's a whole lot more of these projects that need to be done. It's not going to happen in a year or two, that's for sure. But it's wonderful to see that something like that is coming to fruition, and it looks like it's going to be a real success for everybody. So
Yes.
I thank you again very, very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me.
We're going to continue with the rest of our meeting. You're welcome to stay, but I really advise you to go and have lunch.